Representative Beyer from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and ranking member, thank all of you for hanging in for almost 3 hours. I really appreciate that. First, let me, my Republican friend entered in the record an organizational chart listing ORD as if that's sufficient proof that ORD hasn't been obliterated beyond function. So I'd like to supplement that by entering in additional pages from today's EPA website. The main ORD page says in plain language that the 2 leadership roles are vacant, as is every leadership position in every division. And I ask unanimous consent to enter this into the record. And as Congressman Fouché stated earlier, 90% of ORD employees who were there just 1 year ago, December 2024, are no longer at ORD. So I don't think, no serious assessment of the state of ORD would conclude that it still exists in any meaningful way.
So ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Corkwell, I appreciate your testimony and learning much more about the work that your company is doing. And you specifically talked about new innovative chemicals that were more environmentally sustainable and how EPA needs to be a better partner, which is why I think the Democrats here specifically are so concerned about the attacks on ORD and IRIS. There's a lot of concern about the role that microplastics, endocrine disruption, and obesity are playing in the escalation of cases. We're seeing an explosion of cancer in people under the age of 50. And it's not accidental. And we're learning how much exposures in our environment, especially in the gut, can change the microbiome and have devastating ripple effects. So, Dr. Myberg, can you talk about why it's important to have adequate funding for things like the endocrine disruptor screening program and to maintain the research directorate at the EPA?
Oh, thank you very much for that question. I'll simply speak from my experience that the identification of these issues started at ORD with identification of problems that you didn't anticipate at the time when some of the chemicals that were previously approved were approved. And so if you don't have that kind of research in place, then you miss things, miss signals that occur in the environment that may be instructive for what kind of health risks may occur. Now, I'm not saying that every single risk that you to the point about hazard versus exposure. I'm not saying that everything that is identified as a hazard is necessarily a risk, because it is true that you can find ways to, or certain uses will limit exposure and thereby limit risk. But if you don't have the basic data that shows the relationship between exposures and risk, then you're really left sort of operating in the dark. And so that core research is really important, and it's sometimes difficult to do and takes a long time, because especially if you're studying exposures to humans, this is an epidemiological study, and you don't do controlled experiments. You have to go back and look with what happened to people who are inadvertently exposed. And that kind of research takes time, and it's really in EPA's interest to make sure it's supported.
Thank you. It's a great pivot, because I'd love to ask Ms. Bertrand, who you're both sides, 24 years with the EPA, now you're with the chemical folks. You've listened now 3 hours to basically an R versus D debate. Do we have, faster throughput and high speed and innovation and keep up with China, or do we recognize safety and all the mistakes that we've made over the years? Mr. Corkwell, I grew up with leaded gasoline, and we've seen the impact that had. We're finding out PFAS right now. American history, in fact, world history is filled with examples of the real damage done to people about things that we didn't understand. So, Ms. Bertrand, how do we get that right balance so we don't wait 5 years when it could theoretically be done in 6 months or 3 months, and yet still preserve the safety?
So I don't think that safety and competitiveness are mutually exclusive. They can go hand in hand. I think that what is important is to use the best available science in making decisions, and that is what ACC advocates for, using the best available science and using fact and data to make this decision.
And didn't you do the same thing in your 24 years at EPA? Didn't you want to use the best available science then too?
Of course. But
how do you reconcile those? Because all I'm hearing today are attacks from my wonderful friends on the other side about how irresponsible EPA is in dragging these things out for years and years and years, and how that's bad for America and bad for our consumers.
When I was at EPA, one of the areas that I did work on was reducing that backlog of new chemicals very successfully. And it meant looking at establishing very clear processes. Unfortunately, that backlog has now grown back up again. There's 461 new chemistries that are now in that pipeline waiting for review. 90% of them haven't met their statutory deadline.
Let me switch. Oh, actually, I'm out of time, but thank you. This is something that we continue to struggle with because I don't buy the idea that EPA was full of a bunch of people who didn't want to do their jobs well, who woke up every morning saying, let me go see how I can slow this down. There are good people trying to do good work, and we should be supporting them in every way that we can. I yield back.
Thank you.